What is the difference between a film and a movie? Well, to answer that question, I'm actually going to use a TV show. Noah Hawley's Fargo, Season 2, Episode 1, in this week's Analytical Filmmaking Analysis of the Week. By the way, this is a segment from the Carl King podcast, so if you enjoy this video, remember to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. So what is the difference between a film and a movie? Well, it depends on if you're a snob like me. Some might think these terms are totally interchangeable, and they do overlap, but to make a ridiculous generalization, movies are entertainment and films are art. In this week's Analytical Filmmaking Analysis of the Week, we'll examine Noah Hawley's Fargo Season 2, Episode 1, which has at least 5 film-like traits. And here they are. Number 1, recursive storytelling. Number 2, digressive dialogue. Number 3, ironic counterpoint. Number 4, conspicuous cinematography. And number 5, non-sequiturs. First up, recursive storytelling. The name of this episode is Waiting for Dutch, and it begins with a recursive film within a film called Massacre at Sioux Falls. And it's old, it's black and white, and it supposedly stars Ronald Reagan, whose nickname was Dutch, but that film never existed. It only functions as a symbolic reference to a massacre that does happen later in Sioux Falls at the climax of the season. The micro story here symbolizes the essence of the macro story. Jordan Peele's Nope also contains a powerful example of this. By the way, Jordan Peele is not to be confused with Jordan Peterson. That's a different kind of Nope. Anyway, a general movie audience might be confused by this film-like recursive storytelling technique because movies tend to be concrete and literal. Numbers 2 and 3 are digressive dialogue and ironic counterpoint. When the police, Patrick Wilson and Ted Danson, are investigating the crime scene in the Waffle Hut, in which there are dead bodies everywhere, they digress into unrelated conversation. They step over pools of blood as they discuss dinner plans, which is also ironic counterpoint. At the end of the scene, Ted Danson's character discovers a shoe hanging in a tree, and it's a dark comedy moment because we realize how that shoe got up there. As a scene button, he shines his flashlight on it again, and he says, "That's a shoe, all right." And it's very similar to a line from David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which is, "Yes, that's a human ear, all right." If it were more movie-like, this scene would skip the digressive dialogue and ironic counterpoint. The dialogue would focus on direct exposition, that is, relentlessly beating the general audience over the head with information about the plot, and it would be delivered in a genre-appropriate, serious tone. By the way, another famous example of digressive dialogue and ironic counterpoint is the Royale with cheese scene in Pulp Fiction. Number 3, conspicuous cinematography. Movies tend to keep our attention focused on the plot, so they avoid visuals that might remind us we are in a construct. But in a film, the camera work, lighting, and editing can draw attention to themselves, jolting us out of our dreamlike state. And that's part of the fun of a film. In the scene where Rye Gerhardt is driving into town, the camera is mounted on the hood of the car, and there's tons of bokeh, or bokeh, also called focus depth. And you can see all the grime on the hood of the car, yet the town's main street is way out of focus. It's kind of like driving with reading glasses on. Now, a typical shot like that in a movie would normally be the other way around. The main street would be in focus, and the hood of the car would be out of focus. And in most movies, the focus depth tends to be kept within safe limits so that you'll barely notice it anyway. Instead, the filmmakers blur everything else, but draw our attention to all that grime. Well, why not? As the car drives to its destination, the camera rack focuses on the front of the typewriter shop. This conspicuous cinematography is a way of playing with subtlety by reversing it, because Noah Hawley expertly moves between those two extremes, directing our attention and surprising us. Number 5, Fargo is full of non-sequiturs, and that's Latin for does not follow. Sometimes things just happen, and we don't know why. According to IndieWire, in an interview, director Noah Hawley was asked about the flying saucers in Fargo. That's right, in the middle of this dark crime drama, UFOs show up at random. And he answered, quote, "Very early on, I asked, what is our Mike Yanagita?" Now, if you've seen Fargo, the original Coen brothers film, Hawley is referring to a character who shows up briefly and has zero relevance to the plot. At the end of the film, we might think back and wonder, why was that guy in the story? So the director paid tribute to the Mike Yanagita character in his own way with UFOs. Hawley continued, quote, "Whenever you introduce those elements, you engage the audience's imagination. When you're not spoon-feeding a linear story, when you're leaving gaps for the imagination, the audience is going to have to invest more in it. And I think that dynamic relationship is much better than just watching." And I'll put a link to that IndieWire article in the show notes. Overall, movies, as opposed to films, are brutally efficient. Everything that doesn't relate to the physical plot is removed. There's no space for ambiguity and no space for non sequiturs. I think Noah Hawley is a brilliant writer, director, creator who brings a film-like quality to his TV shows, and in my totally subjective opinion, they are second only to Twin Peaks. And if you haven't yet, I recommend you check out every season of Fargo and also his surreal X-Men related story Legion, which by the end of the series takes surrealism to an extreme. Okay, that's it for this week's Analytical Filmmaking Analysis of the Week. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. And support the creation of more by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King.